Alright everybody, we're gonna try this again with a different exam problem. And in this case, we're gonna work a problem from an old exam that's much more relevant to sort of a Twitch style office hours, where we're gonna take a look at the genetics of some kobolds on this mythical world of Galarian. Now, for those of you with social lives that aren't super big nerds, this example is pulled from a game called Pathfinder, which is a mechanical successor to one of the editions of Dungeons and Dragons. And at this point, if you haven't lost all faith in my professional credibility, just be patient and I'll eliminate the rest shortly. At any rate, I like to make my genetics questions sort of fun like this. So really what I'm trying to do with this question is get a feel for whether the student understands a very fundamental problem pertaining to transmission genetics, and can they test whether the data that were obtained by an experiment conform to their expectations that are generated by their hypothesis. So it's very reminiscent of our 315 lab, for example, sort of hypothesis, prediction, gather the data, see whether the data support the prediction made by the hypothesis, that kind of thing. So let's have a look at this one and see what we can determine. And again, I'm going to try to use different colors here, and I'm working in Photoshop so I can swap back and forth and show you some of the material from lecture while I work this problem. Hopefully I'm still streaming and recording. I don't know, this whole Twitch thing is new to me, but I'll get better at it. I like to break my problems up into little subcategories here, and there are two purposes for that, just in terms of giving you a window into how I prepare my exams. One, it makes it easier to grade objectively, and for me to understand if there's a common spot where a student is kind of going off the rails, where they're doing well until they get to p-value, for example, and then I can remedy that in class if I see a common thread in student responses. And two, I think it's just easier with some of the material, not necessarily this problem, for the students to sort of remember the steps and be focused on the process of solving the problem instead of just figure this out, here's a giant blank page. Now, I know that's a little bit of hand-holding, but I feel like it's warranted when we're introducing some of this stuff. So, anyway, let's get back to the kobolds of Galarian. So, kobolds are apparently, for those of you that don't know, a little race of scaly, goblin, halfling-looking creatures. And in this particular problem, their hides are typically red in color. Okay? So, just like in the sex-link problem that we did before, we're going to end up converting this prose, this written description that I'm talking about right here, into genetic notation. That's a really important step for working almost any transmission genetics problem. Alright, so we know that most kobolds are red in color, and here I've set it up so we say rarely we can observe blue scaled kobolds. So we've got a color problem. Local wizard, because of course wizards, yay. Local wizard hypothesizes that scale coloration in kobolds is controlled by a single locus with two alleles. Under the wizard's hypothesis, the R allele is dominant and confers the red color, so let's just go ahead and switch to red, and we'll just say R makes them red, and the little R allele encodes blue. This red allele is dominant. That's pretty much all we know. Now, this problem sort of throws a little twist in here, because this is actually a very trivial genetics problem so far. We cross pure breeding red kobolds with pure breeding blue kobolds. So one of the things that I'm assuming the student knows right away is the definition of pure breeding, which means a strain of organism, whether it's pea plants or kobolds or dragons or whatever you want to do, zerglings, I don't care, that when bred together doesn't have any genetic variation for the particular trait. So pure breeding red means that. And pure breeding blue means that. Little r, little r. Okay? So the wizard does this cross and presumably gets a whole bunch of kobolds with this genotype. But the new information that screws up the hypothesis is that these individuals are purple. Okay? Now, just jumping ahead a little bit, what we would immediately recognize, and I don't really, because I ran out of points to assign to this particular topic, we immediately recognize this would be the harbinger. So if this is red and this is blue and the heterozygote is purple, that would be classified as something called incomplete dominance. And so I'm just throwing that out there. It's really not part of the exam question itself. Okay? Well, actually it is. Look at that. Huh, read the exam question. The R allele displays incomplete dominance, right? So unfortunately, this is kind of a live broadcast, so I can't go back and make myself look smarter than I am. So we'll just have to own that mistake. All right. Draw a Punnett square representing a cross using 2 purple kobolds that the wizard could use to test her hypothesis. So again, purple kobolds are heterozygous, 100% are big R, little r, and are purple in color. Draw a Punnett square representing that cross. This is very, very trivial transmission genetics, and it's just meant to get the student started on the problem that I'm really trying to get at. So here's one purple kobold and another purple kobold, and let me do the Punnett square in my terrible handwriting. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit here, and I hope you can still see that, and that way I can. So we end up with homozygous dominant, heterozygote, heterozygote, homozygous recessive. Okay, so there's a Punnett square, easy 3 points. If you can't do that, you really need to come to office hours, and we'll work on some of these problems and get that kind of basic knowledge cemented in your mind. What phenotypic ratio would she expect out of this cross? So again, this is just converting Punnett squares to the language of genotypic and phenotypic ratios. So the correct answer here is 1 red to 2 purple to 1 blue. Right, so it's really, really important that you put the ratio. So a lot of students will just be like, it's 1 to 2 to 1, I'm done. And it's like, well, do you really understand? Because if you think it's 1 purple to 2 red to 1 blue, that's an incorrect answer. So be complete. The phenotypic ratio should be expressed in both numerically and with the attached phenotypes. So slow down, do it correctly, and preferably with better handwriting than I have. All right, so that's an easy 6 points. Gets a little more difficult at this point because now we've done an experiment. Remember, our hypothesis is that it's incomplete dominance. And we conduct a cross, and we end up with a certain number of progeny in these different categories. So what I'm asking you to do here is use a chi-square test to determine whether these data conform to the wizard's expectations under her hypothesis. And it's really, 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 really important that you show your work. I enjoy giving partial credit to my students. This is where the correct answer goes. If you write the wrong number here and don't show me any of your work up here, I don't know what I can do. If you show me all your work and then just punch the wrong button on the calculator and write the wrong number here, then I can say, well, that was just a calculator error, knock 1 or 2 points off because you were being careless, but give you the bulk of the points because you showed me you really understood what was going on. All right, let's get back to the problem. So we have to set this up as a chi-square. Now, what I want to do is show you the formula page and chi-square table that I'll be projecting in the exam room. Okay, so for this part of the class, there's not a ton of formulas that you really need to remember, but there are 2 that are kind of tough. So this is the chi-square table that I'll explain in a second. This is the binomial expansion. We'll do a few problems of that with in a separate video. Here's a kobold. Awesome. I don't know. I feel like I should give credit to the Pathfinder artist that made this, but I don't know what it is, so sorry. Copyrighted. I don't know. Whatever. This is the formula for the chi-square test statistic that we did in class. Now we could also do a g statistic, but I'm just going to stick with chi-square because that's what's in the textbook. So the chi-square test statistic is simply the sum across all of your various categories of the difference between the observed and expected in each of those categories squared divided by expected. So you would have something very similar to this projected up on the screen during the exam. So I don't ask you to memorize this. I wanted to bring your attention to it now because I'm going to start using some of these terms as I answer the question. So let's go back to the question itself. And then once again, I'm going to zoom in here so that you can see my handwriting a little bit better. All right, so let's start fleshing this out. Okay. So we've got 3 different categories here. We've got red, we've got purple, and we've got blue. Okay. We're going to have an observed number. I'll just put OBS for observed. And that is up here. So 22 red, 22 blue, be careful of the order here, and 17 purple. Okay. Now if you add all of that up, that looks to be like 50, so that's 9, 11 plus 50 is 61. 61 kobolds. Now what we have to figure out is what would our hypothesis have predicted if it were correct? Okay. So we expected a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio, or put differently, 1 quarter red, 2 quarters or 1/2 purple. Can't write. And 1 quarter blue. This would also have been a correct answer up here. So our expected number of red kobolds is 1 quarter of 61. So there are 61 kobolds. We expected a quarter of them to be red. So I'm going to just write 61 divided by 4, which equals, I don't know what that equals. Fortunately, I have a calculator on my cell phone right here. By the way, you're going to need calculators for the exam, and you're not allowed to use your cell phone for a calculator. Now, some of you are going to forget your calculator, and I will make fun of you, and then we'll figure out a solution. Sometimes I bring an extra, and sometimes we just borrow a calculator anyway. So, 61 divided by 4, somewhere in the order of 15.25. Now remember, observed genetic data usually doesn't come in the form of decimals. Expected genetic data, you can have decimals. We expect of 61, 15.25 kobolds to be red. Similarly, in terms of the number of purple, we expect 61 divided by 2, because half of them, 2/4, or half of them, should be purple. So 61 divided by 2, so that would be, what, 30.5? Equals 30.5. And again, I hope your handwriting and structure for these questions on the exam is much, much better than mine. Let me give you an example of some student handwriting that I've had to deal with before. For example, somebody would be wanting to answer a question and they would write like this. And they were super smart students, and so I knew they were very likely to have the right answer, and I couldn't read it. So please don't do that. Anyway, whatever. I digress. So, how many blue do we expect? Again, there are 61 total, and we expect 1 quarter of them to be blue. So 61 times a quarter is 61 over 4. It's the same thing as that 50.25. Okay? So that's observed, that's expected. I just want to refresh your memory here when you look up the formula page, and it's zoomed in, so let me zoom over here. You'll see it's the sum across all of those categories of observed minus expected squared over expected. What I like to do when I'm working chi-square problems on an exam is break it down and don't try to do all of the math all at once. So what I like to do is say, what is each category's contribution to the chi-square test statistic? So in this case, this would be 22 minus 15.25 squared, I'm going to do this, over expected, which is 15.25. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go